I've teased you long enough about it, and I've made you wait this long, but now it's finally time to do the beads. Yay! I'm so excited because this, I think, is really one of the most fun parts of this whole piece. And, the beading is not technically difficult at all. It's not like it's fancy stitches or, interesting knots or anything. It's just simple. You just sort of sew them on. But there's something about working with, the texture of it, the kind of dimensional color of the bead. Some are rainbowy, some are metallic. Obviously, we've got some bugle beads here. So it's just, I don't know, it's just fun to see the colors sort of. At first, you think it's just like a big jumble of nothing and it's not going to work. And then suddenly you have a really cool, blending of colors and shades and rainbow and shapes. So, anyway, that's really, really fun to kind of get off the surface of the hoop a little bit, kind of like the pom pom fringe stitch that we did up here. So, the first beading section we're going to work on is going to be this big circle. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to leave the individual beads that kind of go around here and are under here. We're going to do those very last because, as I mentioned before, when you're doing other stitching, it's very easy for your threads to get caught on those single beads. Like if there's just one bead like these over here, they'll constantly get caught on those. This section, it's such a big section, that's not as much of a problem. Plus, I just want to do this part because it's fun, okay? So to start this big circle, let me zoom in. There, that is much better and easier for you to see exactly what I'm doing. So to start this circle, we're going to first satin stitch the circle, the center circle with 3 strands of the orange thread. And then the ring around that orange circle, we're going to be using bugle beads. Now let me talk quickly about the 2 kinds of beads we're going to be using. We're going to be using bugle beads and seed beads. And if you don't know, bugle beads are beads that are like a tube. And they can be different lengths. These are 2mm bugle beads. You can see that. All right. And I love these because they have kind of a rainbow iridescent blue purple color to them. And the other beads we're going to be using are seed beads, which are the little, the little round ones with the hole in them. But the first beads we're going to use are the bugle beads. And this is probably the most complicated technique we're going to use to sew beads down, but it's not complicated at all. It's really just couching. If you've ever done any couching, it's where you have one thread on top and then you bring another thread and you sew the top thread onto the fabric with a second needle and a second thread. So let's also talk about needles quickly. One issue with beads is that you have to find a needle that will go through the bead. And sometimes it's a little tricky to find one that's small enough to go through these beads. I am going to be using a number 26 chenille needle. And this is one of my favorite needles, one of the 2 needles I use interchangeably, but it's a 26 chenille. And it's about the eye is what is tricky sometimes to get it to go through the side, the hole in the bead, either one, the bugle or the seed bead. And usually the 26 works just fine. Occasionally I'll pick up a seed bead that is just a little too small to go over the eye, and I just take it off and I pick up another seed bead and it goes right through. And I haven't had any trouble with these bugle beads. So I'm using a 26 chenille needle to sew the beads on. But to sew the bugle beads, I'll need a second needle, which is the needle that is going to attach the thread that runs through the beads to the surface of the fabric. And it doesn't matter what size that needle is. It can be larger or it can be the same. Doesn't matter because this needle is not going to be going through the fabric. So since you're probably a little confused what I'm talking about, I have 2 strands of the dark blue thread on my 26 chenille needle. This is the one that's going to be going through the bugle bead. And I'm using 2 strands just for a little bit of extra safety. Sometimes they say you're not supposed to use cotton threads in a bead because the interior of the bead can kind of cut it or make it fray. So, but I haven't had any trouble. But I'm just going to use 2 strands. I know it'll fit through, but it'll be a little bit stronger than just 1 strand. And so I am going to come up right in the center of that ring. And now I'm going to just thread several bugle beads onto my needle. And for the bugle beads, I just pick them up between my fingers and thread them on. So I try when I pick up the bugle bead for this part, since it's so small and I want a really nice circle, I try to find ones that have nice straight, see if you can see this, nice straight ends on them. Sometimes these bugle beads, when they cut them, like one end, they're glass beads, so the end will be kind of jagged or it'll be kind of a strange angle. So for this circle, I try to find ones that all the ends are pretty straight so that they'll, sit together smoothly and one won't be kind of like, at a weird angle. So that's 3 beads. I'm just going to start with, that one has a little bit of a funny angle on it. I mean, they're not perfectly, but I'm just going to go ahead and string on, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads. Doesn't matter which direction you go, kind of whatever is most comfortable for you. So these beads are going to sit in a circle around that orange satin stitching. But to get them to stay, here's where the second needle comes in. I'm going to just put this needle aside for the moment. I'm going to pick up my second needle and I'm going to come up. So now I sort of use this hand to kind of push the beads into place, but I'm going to make sure that bead is pushed all the way as close to the, where the needle came up as I can get it. And then I'm going to bring this needle up right at the end of that bead. And then I'm going to take this thread over the 2-stranded thread, again, really close to that bead, and bring it down. So now that thread and that bead is pushed up tight against the fabric. So now I can slide the next bead down into place like that. Sometimes I will push multiple beads down so I can kind of push on them like that and sort of hold them in place. Your goal here is to keep them from having a lot of space in between, because it's, like I said, again, it's such a tiny little circle, such a small circle. You don't want, 1/8 of an inch between your beads. And sometimes they kind of want to, spread out on you. So I work really hard to push them as close as I can and to get my stitches as close as I can to the end of the bead. So I'm going to push that one down as far as it'll go, put it in place. Going to come up on one side of the thread and go down on the other side of that thread. And now that one is secured. So I'm going to go ahead and take a minute and put a few more of these bugle beads on here. Oh, that one has a strange end on it. Let me just get a few more on. And that one has a funny end. Okay, so now I've got a few more on. I'll put that thread aside, just lay that that needle somewhere else. Okay, so that, I wasn't counting, but that may be 1 bead too many. See how if I lay it down there, how I've got, it doesn't fit? And if I were to put that many beads on, how the circle is too big. It's a little bit too big, so I'm going to probably only use that many beads. But we'll see when we get around. Sometimes the length shifts as you sew it. But so I'm back at this one, so now I'm going to push these down, hold it in place. I've sewn that one. Now it's time to do the third one. Bring it around the circle. Come up as close as I can get it. And go down. I'm hoping you can see this. I know my hands are in the way. On the other side. And now I'll push the next one in place. I will come up as close as I can get it to where the end of that bead's going to be. I'm going to flip this hand over here like that. And that one, see how that bead kind of wanted to move down a little bit? I'm going to make sure it's pushed. It's harder when you're trying to keep your hands out of the way. It's a little easier when you can just hold your fingers down there really close to the fabric or close to the beads. Now that thread is sitting on top of the bead, and that's not what I want. So I'm just going to make sure that it goes down and is on the thread and not the bead itself. So now I'm going to take my fingernail. See how I'm taking this fingernail and I'm kind of pushing on those beads at a slightly better angle now, and it kind of holds them in place. Whoops. So they don't move around as much. And I can go on the other side. And on this couching, it doesn't matter if you start on the outside and bring your needle over to the inside, or start on the inside, go to the outside. It doesn't matter. So I'm doing this one next. Like that. And then let's see, how am I going to come out? I think, see, no, I actually am going to end up using as many, I think. Sometimes you kind of have to make them fit a little bit. So I'm going to work really hard to make those fit. So there's my circle like that. I'm going to try to hold that in place. I can remember which bead I was on. I think I sewn. Yeah. I sewed this one, and now I'm going to sew this one in place. I'm hoping that last bead will actually fit. And it will. I was got a little wonky, but so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You might end up using 8 beads. You might, depending on, if these beads are just slightly different lengths sometimes. So now, you might end up using fewer beads, but it could probably be 8 beads. All right. So now I'm at the very last bead. So this is the only one that's loose. Oh, I do need to take one off of there. I had threaded one too many beads on. Thought I had done that. Hang on, I'm just pulling it off. See, here's my needle and there's the bead. So I'm just going to pull it off my needle that way and put it away. Okay, so now I have that last bead. Here's the needle for the thread that's running through the beads. And now I will just take this needle and go down through the fabric right there where the bead is going to end. Push it into place. And let's see, do I need to attach it right there? I think it's good. So now on the back side, I will just knot these, and then that ring is finished. Seed beads are next. And needle and thread, same thing. The 26 chenille, number 26 chenille, and I'm using 2 strands of the dark pink thread because I'm going to be using these dark pink beads. Let me put this behind here. Okay, can you see those? So let's also talk about this little bowl. This is just a little Pyrex bowl that I have. I like it because it's small, so the beads sort of stay, together, and it has slightly sloped sides. If it had straight sides, it might be a little bit harder if I wanted to reach in and, slide a bead up, or, just pick a bead up like that. There's kind of 2 different ways to get the beads on your needle. But you're going to need some kind of little container. You don't want to spread them on the table, obviously. And I might recommend that you, when you're doing this beading, that you maybe don't stitch on the couch, where if this thing spills over, that the beads just go in your couch and you never see them again. I have lost beads on the floor. Trust me, I stitch at a desk and one of them pops off somewhere, and I'm never to be seen again. But I don't want to lose these because they're so pretty, and they're not the cheapest things in the world, really, being glass. But so that I use this little bowl, and there's 2 ways that I pick up a bead to put on the needle. I either will reach in here and grab a bead like that, and then I will find the hole and I'll put it on the needle. And I did that for a while, and it works. And sometimes, depending on how you're pinching the bead, it's hard to see where the hole is. Like on these, it's really simple. The other ones that are kind of have more clear, a clear outer glass part and a colored interior, sometimes it's hard to see the hole. And I pricked my finger a lot because I'm like sticking, I'm like, oh no, that's not the hole. So I got a lot of little pricks in my finger. It's also easy, like as you're pinching these around and trying to find the hole, it flies out of your hand. So the other way that I have started doing the beads, I'm going to put this piece of paper behind it so you can see better, is I will take my needle and I will put the point of the needle, can you see that? Put the point of the needle, find the hole and push down, and I'll take this finger and slide it up my needle, and there it is. This is kind of a more foolproof way to find the hole more easily. So this is why I use a clear glass. If I had a white dish that was just like this, that would be great. But I don't have white. I only have clear. But, I just pick it up and I can put that point down. I'll show you that again. So there's your beads. So I'm going to touch the tip of the needle on the bead, hold it against the dish, put my finger on it, slide it up, and now I have a bead on my needle. Now be careful with that method too, because sometimes when you touch the tip to it, you'll flick it and it'll go across the room. So just be a little bit careful with that. Now, we're going to fill in this kind of flower star shaped thing. And this is not the kind of thing where you're going to get perfectly straight edges and, clean, perfectly, perfect edges on it, because these are round things and it's kind of a small area. So you may not be able to perfectly fit every bead to have a perfectly straight line. There is one thing you can do, though, to help you place your beads a little bit more accurately if you need to. So let's say that, the beads are just slightly that shape. Now this is not looking at the bead from the top, because that's what that would look like. This is looking at the bead from the side, because they're going to sort of, whoop, there you go. Sorry. Okay, so that's looking at it from the top. This is what they look like from the side, and this is how for this section, this part, this big circle on the wing, they're going to sit on their side. So we're going to see the side of the bead. So there's a hole over here, and there's a hole on this side. And so sometimes in this little small area, you're trying to fit these beads into, spaces, and you have a little bit of control if you remember that if you bring your needle up on this side and run the thread through this direction and put it down over here, the bead will sit this way. If I bring my needle up here and I slide the bead on and I put the needle down here, this direction, then that bead will go that way. So for instance, let's just say I've already sewn some of these beads on. And let's say I want to try to fit a bead. I don't want to leave a hole right there. I want to try to fit a bead right inside there. I would not sew the bead so that it sat this way. I am going to sew the bead so that it would fit up in there like that. So I would bring the needle up on this side of where that hole is, and I would thread the bead on, and then I would take the needle down that way. And so that way the bead is going to sit that direction. So that just gives you a tiny little bit of control about where or how to fit these sort of slightly oval shaped beads into a space. But other than that, it's really super simple. I mean, it's just, there's nothing much to it. Just just start anywhere. And I'm going to, for each bead, I do have to, bring this little bowl up, and I'll get a bead on my needle like that, slide it down, and I don't even really have to slide the bead all the way down. I'm just going to put the needle down, and now that bead is there. And work right next to that one. Same thing, bring the dish up, get a bead on the needle, slide it down, and go down. And the biggest consideration here is that you want the beads to sit close together. So right in here, if you can see, it's a kind of a little skinny area. So I'm going to try to get the bead to sit this way, maybe not this way, just just because. So I'm going to bring the needle up really close to that one, the one I just did. Get a bead on my needle. And now I'm going to go down, take the needle down this direction. I don't even know if you can see that. I know it's really tiny. But now I know that bead, I'll kind of get it to sit on its side for sure. Some beads want to sit on their sides more than others, so I always kind of just try to coax it. Come on, this one actually is misbehaving. So there. So now that one sits right in place. So all I have to do is keep just filling in the space as I see fit. And, you know, there's these little points on this little flower shape. And I kind of learned eventually that if I fit a bead on, well, let me get my drawing out again and I'll show you. It's a little bit easier to show you that way. So if I, let's say, you know, I've got that ring and then I have this kind of shape that's sort of like that. If I want to get kind of a more distinct point, I will have this bead always sit that direction on all of the points for all of the colors. This is a really minor detail, and you know, it's going to look fine. If your bead goes this direction, it's going to be fine. But I just kind of wanted to accentuate that point, so I made sure that each bead, it's too big of course, as I was sewing it on at the very tip there, went this direction, not that direction. I want not that direction, I want it to go this direction. So hopefully that makes sense. So from here on out, all you have to do for each color is just bring the needle up, put a bead on, take the needle down. That's really all this is, but it is fun regardless. Next up are these kind of bubblegum pink beads. They are really pretty because they have like a pink interior and then a clear glass around the edge, and so they look so pretty when they sit on the fabric on their sides. But one consideration about these beads is that they are, even though they're sized, they say they're the same size, they're a bit smaller than these metallic dark pink ones. So I know I talked a lot previously about the number 26 chenille needle being the right size, but I'm going to have to switch to a much smaller needle. And this is probably the needle that I'm going to end up putting in the kits. It's just like it's like a quilting needle actually. I think you can see it's much shorter than a regular embroidery needle, and the eye is super, super tiny. And since that eye is so tiny, don't know if you can see it on the video, since it's so tiny, I'm going to only use one strand of embroidery thread, whereas before I said I was using two. I'm going to go ahead and use one. And that eye is so small, you have to just thread it the old-fashioned way, where you just take the thread and just put it through the eye. It takes a little bit of patience, maybe a little bit of spit on the thread to get it to, or clip the end of the thread so it's kind of at a point, not a fuzzy edge. So anyway, but that's the needle, but otherwise it's the exact same technique as before. So let me do a couple of these beads so you can see how pretty they are when they are on their sides. And I think you can see on the dark pink how I kind of got sort of a general point on each of those little pointy parts. And as always, the main consideration here is really just to make sure that each bead is sitting on its side. You don't want to see the hole for this part. There's going to be some beads later on where we do want to have the hole facing up. But for these, we just want to have the colorful side of the bead sitting up. Other than that, it's the exact same thing. It's kind of a meditative process because it's repetitive and it's just sort of the same action over and over, but it's fun to see those little beads find their little spot right there. All right. So this is the middle section with the bubblegum pink beads. So that's the pink beads done. And I got to tell you, those pink beads are my favorite beads to work with. In fact, I saw those probably a year ago in the store, and I had no plans at all to adding any beading to embroidery. But at the time, I thought to myself, I have got to use those beads in something. They're so pretty. And here we are a year later. But next up is the green beads around the edge. And before I do that, let me talk a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about this needle and this tiny needle with the little bitty eye and threading the needle. So if I take this little bitty eye and try to, push this thread through that has a fuzzy end on it, that's going to be really hard. So what I will do is I'll take my embroidery scissors and I will cut. Ooh, can you see this? I will cut at an angle, like a really sharp angle. So I'm not cutting it at a 90-degree angle like this. I'm going to turn my scissors and I'm going to try to get the tip of that thread to be a really pointy point, if that makes sense. And then, don't hold your breath. I'm not sure I can, let me trim it again. Not sure I'm going to be able to get it through here while everybody watches, but we'll see. So now I'm going to just try to get this through. Ah, look at that, first try. Woo! That's like deserves some sort of award or something. So anyway, that trimming off that end to a sharp point will definitely help with that. You can get needle threaders that are specifically made for really tiny eyes, but I didn't have one handy, so I just had to do it the old-fashioned way. So now I have a knot in that thread, and again, one thread. I've switched to the bright green thread, and I am going to use these really pretty bright green, kind of rainbowy. They have sort of a rainbow glass on them, just a little bit. I'm going to do that around this edge, and it's the exact same thing, of course. The one consideration to keep in mind while you're working on these is that you do not, almost sent a bead flying across the room. You do not, since you're working up here on the edge, around this edge, and you don't want the green beads to sit right on this pattern line. In other words, this black line that's drawn right here, you want the green beads to stay inside that line. And why? Because we're going to come back in a minute and we're going to put a ring of the iridescent, purpley blue iridescent bugle beads. And if the green beads are sitting on that line, by the time you put the ring of bugle beads, it gets too big. And like up here, like by this leaf, the bugle beads might run into that leaf. So you want to just keep the green beads inside the pattern line. And again, you're not going to have this super crisp, perfect circle of, perfect edge of green beads around this circle. Just do the best you can, and then when we put the bugle beads on, it'll kind of hide sort of the ragged edges of the circle. All right, get that bead to stand up on its side. Okay, now I'm going to go fill in all of these green beads. So that is the section with the green beads done. Honestly, every time I say that, I feel like I'm saying green beans. But anyway, those are the green beads. And you can tell it's not a perfect circle. I did a pretty good job right here. It's nice smooth edge, but over here it's pretty wonky. That's okay. What we're going to do next, so we'll sort of cover that up. And I will say that the green beads, they fight you a little bit more to stand up on their sides. The pink beads, like the bubblegum pink beads, I don't have any trouble. They all just want to lay perfectly. But the green beads, I felt like I just spent a lot more time getting each bead to not lay flat with the hole facing up. But anyway, in fact, I think there's one over there that just wants to lay down. But anyway, the last part, to do the outside ring, we're going to do it exactly like the inside ring. I've switched back to my 26 chenille needle with the 2 strands of blue thread, and that's just because the bugle beads are big enough to handle this one, and it's just so much easier to thread this one. and I can go ahead and put 2 strands of thread, which is good. And then I have my second needle, which has the 1 strand of blue thread, which will be the thread that I will, couch this thread with. So just as before, I'm going to come up with the 2 strands and thread a whole bunch of bugle beads onto this needle. And again, I am going to reject the beads that have a diagonal end on them, because they lay, when you're trying to get them to lay real pretty in a circle, they make the circle look like it has a kink in it. So I'm going to spend some time picking out the beads that don't have I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, that don't have an angled edge on them. So there's some right there. It's going to take a lot more than that, but I'll go ahead and push those down. And I'll put that needle up there for just a moment. And then same thing, I will just lay those down, but I make sure those beads get pushed as close together as they can. And I'll come up, whoops. This is the first bead, or in between the end of the first bead. And then just couch that thread. And this is the exact same thing. I'll take my finger and sort of push those beads down now that that first one's secured, and now I can more easily hold that in place, and those won't move around, and I will, whoops, that's not where that goes. It goes right in between those beads, and down. All right. Same thing as before, just do that all the way around the green beads.